Hello and welcome back to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Friday, June 25th, 2021, almost. If you're watching the live stream, it's actually June 24th, a Thursday. And we're back. It's another weekend, and that means that we are right in the thick of the schedule. Another race this weekend, which I think is the first in 17 race weekends in a row or something. It's getting to the really exciting part of the season. We've had some great races this year so far. Hoping we're going to see more at the Red Bull Ring this weekend, and the first of a doubleheader, which is kind of, I suppose, par for the course nowadays. But it's good. I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm glad it's almost weekend. And Mark, I don't know where your stamina is coming from because you just got off the Spaces chat on Twitter. Now you're doing the podcast. I'm hoping maybe some of the people that were in the Spaces chat are now going to join us in the live stream. If not, hey, but you know what's weird? I came in. You're like, hey, come in, say hi before we do the show. I was talking. Nobody could hear anything. I was talking. I feel kind of rude, but I'm going to put that down to a technical glitch. But how are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. And it's funny because you made a comment months and months and months ago that the risk of doing a podcast about Formula One is there's going to be a moment where you start to realize your audience knows more about the subject matter than you do. I think that moment is far, far, far back in the rearview mirror. I think our audience is matured far beyond the subject matter and the quality of product that we're delivering at this point. And that that's something that hits me square in the face every time we do a Spaces chat. But yeah, it was fantastic. It was awesome. So thank you to everyone that joined once again. We had taken some of the feedback that we'd had before. So we've done a few Spaces sessions so far, but they've principally been kind of surprise. Like, I've got a couple of minutes. Let's stand a chat up, see who joins. But this one we had marketed, we put out there on Twitter, let people know in advance. And I think that's
Yep.
probably something we'll do in advance. Maybe what we'll do is start doing a Thursday session immediately before the podcast so we can kind of build them back to back and have some consistency there. I know everybody loves that. The other thing that we're potentially talking about doing is there's been a lot of listeners that have asked to do a Zoom chat. So we might look at that. I've got a Zoom subscription. So obviously we can share some invites to that. So that's something we're obviously looking at doing. But big news on the personal front. And this simply reflects the fact that we're not yet at a stage where Formula One is handing us credential media passes. But my wife and I today put out the money. We keyed our credit card into the browser and we bought tickets to Yas Marina, to the race at Abu Dhabi, to conclude the season in
Wow,
December.
cool.
Now, more than ever, I am totally 100% invested in this championship going down to the wire. I want Max and Lewis to alternate race victories every single weekend because now that we've outlaid that cash, I want to see the title decider. And we were super lucky, and everyone's heard this before, but in 2016 we bought tickets mid-season, probably June, July, when we went to Abu Dhabi last time for a Grand Prix, and we were lucky because the championship was actually decided while we were in attendance, which was unbelievable. You could feel the energy and the tension that was around the racetrack that weekend. So hopefully it's going to be the same thing this year. And I think not only do we want that, but I think the TV networks want that. And I think everybody listening at home wants a championship that goes down to the final race of the season.
Yeah, 100%. I feel exactly the same way. I've just really been enjoying the way that it's kind of seesawed back and forth over the first 7, 8 rounds of the season. And I think ultimately that will be the mark of whether or not this becomes like a modern classic season, is just how long does this battle between Lewis and Max keep going? Does it go for another couple of months and then one of them takes a decisive lead in the championship that ultimately it becomes too much of a lead for the other one to catch up? Or does it go back to be something similar like we saw in 2016 with Rosberg and Hamilton, where, like you say, it comes down to a very small gap and it gets decided on the final race of the year? Ultimately, I think that would be wonderful that both the drivers and the constructors championship gets decided at that date and that time, because then we would all be on the hook here for months and months and months to come, and that would be absolutely wonderful. Hey, but Mark, before we go further into the show, there's one thing I want to pick up on that you guys were talking about in the Spaces chat just now.
Was it
Is it
us
space?
teasing you about talking about Valtteri Bottas too much?
Yeah, no, don't worry, bro. I got you covered. I got your I've got
Oh,
your Valtteri Bottas story here. But the
stories
one thing,
plural.
somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was talking about Rich Energy, and I don't know what it is. I was thinking about Rich Energy just the other day, and the one thing that I first of all was thinking about was first of all that almost iconic color scheme that they had, that black and the gold, very reminiscent of the John Player special that what was it, Lotus would have had in the late 70s, early 80s, obviously. Tobacco, obviously not the greatest tie-in when it comes to advertising, but the one thing I was wondering is, I can go down to the 7-Eleven here, I can go down to the gas station, I can get a can of Red Bull, I can get a can of Monster Energy drink or Rockstar or anything. Where the hell do you buy Rich energy drinks? Does it actually exist, like in physical form? Can you go somewhere? Can I order a case of it online? Can I buy it at Costco? Can I get it at the Sev? I don't know.
But that was always the joke, right? Which is
Yeah.
how Haas not do their due diligence when they partnered up with Rich Energy. Like, if you're considering signing up with this team to a multi-million dollar collaborative marketing arrangement, you've never seen their product in a store. They have no plans to get it to a store. I've still never seen it in a store. I've read a few times that it's been magically available in kind of a back alley stall at the Indianapolis 500. I've seen a few people on Twitter indicate they were able to order some off of Amazon, but
Okay.
my sense is that even mainline retailers like 7-Eleven and in the UK Spar and some of those places, just they don't have the appetite to do business with this company. But yeah, it's such a phantom product. And it's,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, somebody on the chat, I can't remember if it was Charlie or Armando, indicated that Rich Energy now has a deal with a team in the British Superbike Championship. So we're looking at a photo of the bike. So they're still treading water, so to speak, but
Hmm.
they still don't have a product. And if you look at their financial statements, they have no income, they have no assets. That they're basically a phantom organization.
You know who would be totally down to invest in Rich Energy is that dude that dropped to 18 large on the invisible statue. Did you hear that story
Oh
about a week
man,
or so ago? There's this artist, I can't remember where he was. He basically created an invisible sculpture and somebody paid 18 grand. I don't know if it was dollars or euros or pounds, whatever. It doesn't matter what currency you're talking about. 18 grand is a lot. And basically, the invisible sculpture stands on top of just a plinth or what do you want to call it? A little stand
sure.
about 3 or 4 feet tall. So, that guy probably would invest in Rich Energy. So if anyone out there has been able to buy it, hit us up, let us know. I'm very curious to see whether or not this stuff actually exists.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
So
Fascinating.
but I want to switch now and go into the actual news of the week. But before we get to that, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Let's just put it that way. I'm going to I'm going to tease you a little while longer. I'm going to save the Valtteri Bottas story probably until after the break because it all kind of ties into a larger picture of several drivers I want to talk about. But first of all, the first couple of things I want to talk about, and I know that a couple of people were actually talking to us, or we got some tweets about it, and I want to get to that. And this is this new directive that's come down to slow down pit stops, which I'm totally not cool with. But first of all, I guess we can say that you've been put on blast by the FIA or by the people at Yas Marina because they are going. Because just barely days ago, we talked about how hardly we ever see changes to tracks made. Is it announced that they're going to put in some banked corners at Yas Marina, which I think is a wonderful development. We did bring it up though in the show on Sunday night or last week that we do see occasionally that these changes do get made to the tracks. Albert Park in Melbourne being one. Barcelona, was it turn 9 or 10, was restored to its original format. But I think this is really cool that they're actually going to do something there to try and rehaul the track and make it, I guess, a little bit more racy. So this is really cool. I hope that it has the intended consequence, the intended what do you want to call it? I'm not even sure, but I hope that it lives up to what the design is, because this is something that I was really looking forward to see at Zandvoort, that we're going to see a little bit later on this summer into the early fall, where they put in some bank corners as well. And I think it'd be fantastic to watch these cars pulling the G's and going through these bank corners. So I'm really looking forward to see how this turns out at Yas Marina.
Yeah, boy, did I feel like a moron when I saw this story. Probably Monday morning or Tuesday morning. So we'd recorded Sunday night,
Yeah.
right? We recorded Sunday night, and Eric, one of the listeners, had asked this great question about the fact that track organizers or track owners don't often seem to be super reactive to making changes to the configuration to make racing more compelling. And I'd gone on this 18-minute and 32-second spiel about it doesn't happen for logistical reasons and economic reasons and technical reasons. The next day, Abu Dhabi's like, hey, we're going to change the track. We're going to invest a couple $1 million and kind of clean up a couple of the corners to make racing more exciting. And one of the things that's really cool about this too is Fernando Alonso came out today and talked about the fact that he anticipates that this is going to certainly promote a more racy atmosphere and potentially more overtaking in corners that overtaking was never possible before. But specifically, if you look at the quotes in the story that you and I are looking at right now, works anticipated to begin this summer. The overhauls are fairly significant. One, at the hairpin section, the chicane before it will be removed. With the width of the track in this area will also be opened up to allow multiple racing lines and potentially more passing opportunities, because before it was a very tight corner with a single racing line. There was no chance of overtaking. And then the second one, at the end of the second back straight, the tight and twisty complex of bends are being removed completely and replaced with a high speed and wide banked, which is what you were just referring to a couple of seconds ago.
Love it.
Wide corner. And this is interesting because if Yas Marina is anything, it's super flat. So building in a banked corner is expensive, and it'll add a really exciting new dynamic or twist to this circuit. And this is a track that's been on the calendar since, I guess, 2009. So this will be year 12, year 13 at Yas Marina. I think it's due, and I'm super excited that they're taking this on, because ultimately they don't need to. This race isn't going anywhere. It's a staple on the calendar. They spend a ton of money, but it's also very cool that they kind of understand where the headwinds are in the sport, and that fans and viewers and drivers and teams are looking for more excitement and more opportunity for racing moments. And this is just fantastic. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, me too. And I wonder where the incentive is for these different venues to actually do this. I mean, Zandvoort, I think that was the intention all along, was to revamp the circuit and modernize it and make it a little bit, I guess, more compatible, or maybe compatible isn't the best word to
No,
use,
that
but
is the right word. I would agree
you
that
think
that's a
so?
good word. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, okay, compatible with the modern Formula One cars, but we've seen, like I said, the changes that they're making to Albert Park, the changes that we've already seen at Barcelona, and now the changes that are being implemented for Yas Marina. So I wonder where this undercurrent, where this incentive, the idea that these different venues should incorporate these changes. I'd love to know if there's been some sort of incentive somewhere in the background of Formula One. Maybe not, but it's great to see,
Totally.
because if it makes the on-track product more exciting, I'm totally 100% for it. Hey, Mark, before we go on to the next one, so we got Wallace in the live chat. He wants to know, he says, I saw the changes. Could you guys break down why it's a little more racy, aka why do lots of corners make it less racy? You want to take that one?
I'll let you take it, sir.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, thanks, man. Well, I mean, the one thing is I think that's kind of cool. Like you said, I mean, they're going to be, removing the chicane there, adding in the different corners. So, I mean, you're not going to have, I mean, the whole idea with the chicanes is actually to slow the cars down. It's partially a safety thing. So I guess that it's by taking it out, you're going to get more speed going into it. Going into the bank corner, you'll have the combination of the downforce and the grip and the banking holding the cars in place, so they'll be able to carry more speed into the corners. I think the one thing I do like about that track at Yas Marina, and you can disabuse me if I'm wrong, is that very long back straight when they come down into that hairpin around where, what's it called, Ferrari World is. That big venue right at the end where you see like the big roof with the prancing horse on the top, and they go down there. It's a very long straight. It's not necessarily one of the longest in Formula One, but it is significant, or maybe it is. I don't actually know how long that one is. So to be able to carry more speed going into there, I think will be really cool, and especially adding that banked corner. And I've always liked this one, simulating it in the F1 racing game, because I really like that sort of sweeping set of corners when you come out of start finish. You take that very sharp 90-degree left-hand corner through those sweeping corners through the first third of the track, but I always hated that left and right chicane into the hairpin. Playing video games, obviously very accurate when compared to a real Formula One car, asterisk. But certainly, I think, from just a gaming point of view, it really disrupts like the flow of the circuit. So I can imagine being a real driver in a real Formula One car, being able to get rid of that chicane as one part of the track, going into that banking, then going into that straightaway. I think it's going to be awesome. I really do.
I totally agree. And I think you've done a fantastic job of summarizing. The other main consideration, too, is those tight technical corners, as you described, ultimately require the cars to slow down. But the way the track's constructed was that there was really only a single racing line. So even if a car made a mistake, there wasn't really an opportunity for somebody else to pass them. The way that the track's being reconfigured enables multiple racing lines. So in theory, there is an overtaking opportunity in both of these corners now, especially the banked corner. So you could carry potentially more speed into that corner, attack a different racing line than the person in front of you, and potentially pass them. Whereas in the past, because of the configuration of the corners, because they were so tight, because there was only a single racing line, and because they were so technical, it ultimately slowed the cars down. It wasn't exciting and there was no passing opportunity. Now you've simplified, you've smoothed out those corners. There's going to be more speed carried in. There's multiple racing lines. There's opportunity to overtake. But yeah, I'm super pumped about this, but especially excited about that bank corner. And some people are suggesting it might be an iconic corner, which is high praise.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pick up on this, but first of all, I want to take a quick break because I want to actually go back and talk about a real old school track that has banking, and it's not going to be Monza. So I'm just going to leave that sort of dangling there as we go into the break. So guys, don't go away. We're going to be right back. We're going to talk about. I'm not going to give it away. We'll talk about the mystery track, all the latest Formula One news, and much, much more on the other side. So don't go away. We're going to be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. It's Mark and Mark, Daly and Hamilton, and we're talking Formula One. So, any idea which track that I
Zandvoort.
hinted? Well, closer. It's closer to where I'm thinking than Monza
Indianapolis.
is. Oh, you're cold. You're ice cold, my friend. You were closer when you said Zandvoort, but
Hmm. Okay, I'm out of guesses. Tell me, tell
oh,
me.
okay. Well, I'll cut you some slack here because this track actually closed before World War II. So this is Brooklands. Have you ever heard of
Yes,
Brooklands?
yes.
Yeah, so Brooklands is a very old track, opened, I believe it was just before 1910, give or take a couple of years. It closed just before the start of the Second World War. It's in a, I like to say a suburb, but it's in a town called Weybridge, just outside of London, south of London. I went there on a family holiday. I would think I was probably 16, 17, thereabouts. Most of the track is gone now, and it was kind of a kidney-shaped track. And nowadays, I believe it's a business park. But what I think is really cool is that part of the track has actually been preserved. And it was like a completely banked circuit. So I mean, this is really, really old school. I mean, this is when cars were basically like a brand new thing. But the one thing that really what really stood out in my mind and really impressed me was number one, you can picture these people flying around at whatever speeds they were doing back in 1907 or 1910 up until the 1930s in a leather helmet and no seat belts and all these crazy things, right? But it was just the angle, the steepness of that banking. And I remember at the time they did have a McLaren there. This is like a Senna Prost era McLaren Honda. I can't remember exactly which car it was, and it just really impressed upon me at the time that I thought it would be spectacular if you could put a Formula One car on a track like that. Maybe not banking all the way around or in all the corners, but in some banked corners. And lo and behold, like a million years later, I'm finally getting my wish. So kind of a long roundabout story, but certainly go online, go Google up Brooklyn's racetrack, go check it out. It's a really cool place. If you ever get a chance to go there in person, they got an awesome museum. And I believe there was also like an RAF base there during the war as well, or very, very close by. But yeah, very, very cool place to be. Now, do we want to talk about the pit stop thing, or do we want to talk about the British Grand Prix? You, my friend, get to choose here.
I think we could talk about the British Grand Prix. Obviously, the technical directive is a very, very hot topic on Reddit,
Yeah,
on Twitter, and on YouTube right now. We talked about it at length in the Spaces session. So maybe we talk a little bit about the British Grand Prix, and then we can segue into something that's probably a little bit more
sure.
controversial than the British Grand Prix hosting a large crowd.
Yeah, I don't think we really need to spend too much time on this one, but I did think it was kind of interesting because Lewis was talking that even though that they've been given the green light to basically fill the premises with 140,000 people on race day, he still feels it's what he calls premature. And he's well, I mean, I think that's fair, that and a good thing, to encourage people to be precautious and just do the right thing when it comes to being healthy and responsible, because I mean, the pandemic is starting to die down. Bad choice of words there. It's starting to dissipate somewhat, but I think that's a fair call. But it is interesting too, because did we talk about it last week? I think what you were saying was that the race is due to go on, what was it, July 19th? And I think that with the current COVID regulations or restrictions in the UK are set to expire the day after. And I believe Boris Johnson has said all the time that this is a one-way track forward. And yeah, I guess that you could take 20 people into a room, ask them the same question, you would probably get a slightly different answer from every different person. But I don't know if we're not there. I just I have a kind of a mixed reaction to it, but I do agree with Lewis in a sense that if you're going to go, just be responsible about it. Even though the risk being outside in the pandemic seems to be virtually zero. But I'm glad that they're being able to put that many people in there. I don't necessarily think it's the wrong call. I just hope that it doesn't turn out to be the wrong call, right? If you know what I mean.
It's one of those things that's funny, right? Like you read this story and Hamilton's being very cautious and very conservative. But there was another story that was released as well. And obviously, it was quotes from a different interview with Hamilton. And he was very positive and he was excited to be back in front of those fans, and that the British Grand Prix presents one of the best environments and atmospheres on the calendar.
Yeah,
Obviously, he's been enormously successful there. The hometown atmosphere for him is probably unlike anything he experiences anywhere on the calendar. And he gets really strong support at every single race. I've shared the story before as well, but in 2018, I was shooting qualifying at the British Grand Prix trackside, and Hamilton put in the fastest time. He took pole, but you could feel in the ground the reaction to people when his time was posted on the board and it
hmm
was clear that he'd taken pole. It was palpable. It was this a magical experience that I wouldn't trade for the world, to be there and to be a part of that. And I wasn't there to watch. I was there taking photographs on the side of the track, but I still felt it and I still experienced it. And obviously for him, I think this is a magical place. I agree with you. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. My sense is that if we're at a position where 60, 70, 80% of the population is vaccinated, at what point do we say, look, you know what? You've done everything you've been asked. You've been vaccinated twice, you're being safe. As a government, we feel that we can empower you to make the decision to go to a racetrack outdoors. And granted, there's going to be 140,000 people there, but this is also very different than an enclosed bowl or a domed stadium or an arena. It's
exactly.
140,000 people spread around a 6 kilometer racetrack. It's very, very different. And to your point, if people can be responsible, I'm going to take a little bit of extra distance, or maybe I'm going to wear a mask when I'm in the stores, or if I'm in the washroom. Like, if people are just responsible, I think it should be okay.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, it's outdoors. Everybody's spread out the entire perimeter of the track, and it's not like it's crammed everybody into a small arena or something like that, or into a gymnasium. So hopefully it all works out as planned. But just going back to to what we were just talking just now about the bank corners, Charlie Tinkler in the live chat says Pirelli better get it together for this banking. So there you go, a new.
Oh, he stole my line. I had that written down right here. I wanted to revisit that.
There you go, Charlie.
Oh, Charlie.
Beat you to it. Okay, so now we have this sort of button topic that we were talking about, or just hinting at just now. But I am not a big fan of this. And basically, what the FIA is doing, they want to slow down Formula One pit stops starting at the Hungarian Grand Prix in a couple of weeks from now. So they do have a reference in the technical regulations that reference pit stops, and that basically refers to sensors that must act passively. And this kind of goes down the rabbit hole a little bit. This is Article 12.8.4 that says, quote, devices which are used to fit or remove the wheel fasteners may only be powered by compressed air or nitrogen. Any sensor systems may act passively. So basically what they're doing is they're using the old excuse, or the reason of safety concerns, and they're basically trying to cover off on complaints that some of the teams that they're running are going faster that can be achieved by following the current rules within the way that they're written. So I guess if you look at it in that light, when it comes to safety, sure, safety always has to be the number one concern, but I'm not a big fan if, this is just a way of maybe pacifying some of the voices that have voiced these complaints, I guess you could say, rather than, yeah, I don't really know how to word it. Let's just put it this way. I love watching the pit stops, especially when it comes down to the big teams and seeing who can nail it. And I get really, really excited when you can see like these where they get to about 2 seconds or these world record 1.9 seconds. I think it's a spectacle. I think it's awesome. And I'm just not in favor of anything that's going to slow it down unless it's an obvious safety concern. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. And I'm going to read out a tweet that I tweeted out a little bit earlier today, but I tweeted, "Dear FIA, unnecessary midseason rule changes that are perceived to disadvantage a single team under the guise of safety are a surefire way to turn off your new fans." And I feel very strongly about this. When we were in the Spaces chat earlier tonight, Armando had made a great point that, look, if this is a legitimate safety concern, I think people would get it, right? Ultimately, this is an incredibly dangerous sport. And the last thing that any of us wants to see is a preventable injury or death, either to a driver, a marshal, or a spectator. The reality, though, is what they're arguing that they're attempting to prevent here is the unsafe release of a car that doesn't have a wheel attached correctly. That's
Mhm.
ultimately what they're saying here is that, look, this is a risk. We want to address the risk. But is the risk a problem? And if you look at what's happened to this year, like, okay, you know what, Mick was released prematurely. Ultimately, he didn't get out of the pit lane. He ultimately retired. Not a good look, but they caught that. Were there any other major issues this year? Not really. Last year, not really. 2018, sure, there was 10 unsafe releases. Two of them, by the way, two of them were Haas cars at that Australian Grand Prix. I think we probably all recall that, where they released two cars consecutively without the wheels being bolted on properly, both because of cross-threading issues.
Still bizarre.
Still bizarre. But ultimately, I don't believe this is an issue. And again, I'm all for the FIA launching a technical directive if it's to address a pressing safety concern. But this doesn't seem to be a safety concern. And the reality is, this is something that the teams do and rehearse and practice. It's
Mhm.
almost a foolproof process. Again, that Valtteri Bottas example was a complete freak circumstance, but that also wasn't a safety issue because they didn't get the wheel off the car. But ultimately, these wheels have 3, maybe 4 threads. It's very easy to get them on. It's very difficult to get them on incorrectly. And then ultimately, the telemetry and the data that the car is collecting will tell the pits immediately if something's wrong. And if the telemetry doesn't pick it up, the drivers will know. The likelihood that a car could ever get on track and get up to speed and lose a wheel is almost non-existent. And even if they lost the wheel, they're tethered to the suspension. So it's not
Yep.
like that wheel is going to hit somebody in the car. Like, again, there could be an injury, there could be a crash. I think this is terrible. I think the timing is terrible. If you want to do this, do it in the off season. And the other thing that I kind of came to mind as I was reading this article, and I was getting angrier and angrier as I was reading through the article line by line by line, is please let this be a 2022 initiative. And then I saw that word Hungary, and
Hmm.
I almost saw red. I was so frustrated, and I was thinking maybe I'm the exception here. So I went to Twitter, overwhelming negativity. I went to Reddit, overwhelming negativity. We went into the Spaces chat, overwhelming negativity, and the perception, and that's the danger here, is the perception seems to be that this is a change that's being incorporated to handicap one specific team. And the other piece too, and you nailed it, is the pit stop is one of the most exciting parts of the race because you're letting these mechanics do what they do best. They practice, they work out, they rehearse this time and time and time again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And when we saw that 1.82-second Red Bull pit stop a couple of years ago, that was an unbelievable feat. We'll never see it again. But no longer are the pit stops the best of the best. They're going to be artificial. There's going to be a basement, and the teams can't go below that basement because they'll be in violation of the technical directive. I'm not feeling this at all. And then sorry,
No.
I'm going to let you go because I'm getting worked up.
Yeah, I know. I think it's against the sort of the ethos of Formula One. Like I say, I
Totally.
totally agree with like the safety aspect of it. But what are the biggest safety risks when it comes to safety in the pit lane? The unsafe releases, like you mentioned, and you can never really put that on the driver because the driver's looking straight ahead. They have a
Yeah.
very narrow field of view. They just look as soon as they're given the signal to go, they just hammer it and go. They're out in the pit lane, they're going. And ultimately, they just have to take what they're being instructed to do on good faith. I mean, that call comes from somewhere else to let that driver out of the pit box back into the pit lane. So that is the number one thing. I mean, we did see it a couple of years ago when the mechanics just get a little bit out of sync, or the car comes off of the jacks or something. Because you remember it was when Kimi Räikkönen was at Ferrari, and his one of the mechanics got knocked over, and he broke his leg and stuff like that. Unfortunately, those things happen, and it's just unfortunately part of the sport when you get that many people working around a car in such a small space, and even when they come into the pit lane still doing 60-80 kilometers an hour. That's still 35 or 50 miles an hour. I mean, that's still a vehicle that's moving very, very quickly. And unfortunately, those things are going to happen from time to time. Or maybe a mechanic's going to trip over an air hose or something like that, because we always see them when they're going out of the pit box. The mechanics in the next pit box ahead of them, they're holding the hoses back just so they give them a little bit more room. Then also the one big safety issue, which became a thing a couple of times in years gone by, which is the refueling. We'll all remember what happened to was it to Jos Verstappen, or was it to Johnny Herbert with Benetton like 25 years ago? And that was because I think Benetton had actually taken some sort of fuel limiter out of the refueling rig. So the thing was actually pumping more fuel through the system into the car that could handle. They take it off the car, and there's a little bit still in the nozzle. It splashes onto the exhaust manifold, and you get this ultra high octane, basically jet fuel, touching an extremely hot exhaust manifold. And yeah, well, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, even if it's just like a half a cup of that that fuel, I mean, it's just going to go up. So I mean, that obviously is not an issue nowadays. And it is interesting though how we've seen so many things sort of get punched up on the fly this season. The track limits, the tire pressures, now this
Right.
pit lane thing. And I understand why they're doing it, but it looks a little bush league at times when they're changing up mid-season. I can understand obviously the tire thing, that if teams are running the tires below pressure, that could be very dangerous, like we saw at the big accidents for Max and Lance in Azerbaijan. But yeah, I would say if you have to address it, do it, but try and keep it to the absolute minimum amount of rule changes in season. That's otherwise, like you say, it looks hokey.
Two final points on this. One, I've tried to put together a perspective on what unsafe releases have looked like over the
Hmm.
last 6 seasons. To the best of my knowledge, because this data is not recorded anywhere, but to the best of my knowledge, it looks like Haas has the most unsafe releases in the last 6 years.
That's
They
not a
are
surprise.
also, over the last 6 years, they are also the slowest pit stop team in Formula One. So if you want to take Haas as kind of this sample of what slow pit stops look like, it doesn't necessarily translate into safer releases. That the team with the slowest pit stops in the last 6 seasons is also the team with the most unsafe releases. And then finally, I think we all know what's going to happen, right? A couple of weeks from now, a month from now, we're going to go into the Hungarian Grand Prix. One of these teams is going to compromise a race. A driver is going to lose a place. There's going to be a penalty. Something's going to happen. And the competitive balance of a race is going to be disrupted because ultimately a team's going to be too fast, or there's going to be a signal and they're going to have to repeat a motion, and then there's going to be confusion. Like, I think my single biggest fear here is that a race could be decided because of a pit stop that was too fast, as
Hmm.
opposed to a stop that was too slow. And maybe that single race translates into a championship, and then all of this just becomes a big talking point and a big distraction. So we're taking away from what we should be talking about, which is the on track action, and we're
Yeah.
ultimately going to be talking about, hey, shame on that mechanic because he was able to pull the tire off in 0.15 of a second instead of 0.20, which is the mandated fastest time. That to me is the biggest fear, is that 5 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, a race is going to be disrupted. Maybe multiple races are going to be disrupted because this is so unnatural. It's very, very unnatural. And I don't know how the mechanics and the teams are going to adjust to this in a rapid manner.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's leave it there. I know you're dying to talk about about Valtteri Bottas. We'll do so in just a moment after we take a break here on the podcast. It's always up to speed with Formula One, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. And Mark, I am being a little bit cheeky because I'm not trying to be mean towards Valtteri Bottas, but I do want to talk about him for a couple of minutes, but I'm not going to start with him right away. The first story I did want to talk about is Lewis has said that he is actually talking with Mercedes about a new contract. And he said, well, he hasn't said too much, but all he's revealed that the talks have been positive so far. Now, it's we got to go there, right? And basically, Juan Pablo Montoya, ex Formula One driver, he said that he believes that Mercedes need to make a quick decision about Bottas to ease pressure in the team. And this goes back to what we talked about, and specifically what you mentioned way back months ago before the season even started. But you were talking more about Lewis
Hamilton.
Hamilton's
Yeah.
contract, that by virtue of just giving him a single year deal, a 1 year deal, it just automatically set the stage for this to be a talking point all year long. Now, this whole sort of secondary topic about Valtteri Bottas and some of the drama and all the things that have sort of gone on with him recently. I mean, just this week, Total Wolf was talking about how he really liked what he called the feistiness of Bottas in France last week, about that sort of explosion that he had on the race radio, about like how he was all upset that they did switch to the two-stop strategy. And then Bottas himself said that he thinks that it's false, that his outburst on the radio has negatively affected his relationship with the team. And in the background, we've had George Russell, who impressed with the team ever since last year when he filled in for Lewis at Sakir. And those conversations are going to be there. And Bottas, I think, is a normal, natural conversation to have about his contract at this time of year, because this is typically the time of year where they have announced it in the past that they've re-upped him, given him another 1 year deal. And then it's all said and done. He goes off and helps them win a championship, and he wins a race or two here and there during the rest of the season. But of course, then you had Lewis. He gets the 1 year deal, and now you get everybody talking about Bottas. You got everybody talking about Hamilton. Who's he? What's he going to do? Is he coming back? Is he going? What's happening with George Russell? And I would actually say that by just due to the fact that Mercedes hasn't committed to either of these guys one way or another beyond a single year, I think that this has become, I wouldn't say worst case scenario, but I think this has become a completely avoidable distraction right in the bitter fight in the middle of a championship fight that they're having with Red Bull. They've been struggling a little bit. They've made some uncharacteristic mistakes both on the track and on the pit wall at different times throughout the season so far. And it just does not seem very Mercedes like. I think at this point in time, they should be focusing on winning races. They should be focusing on the championship, which they are. But then they've got all these things going on in the background, because is Lewis happy? Is he coming back? Is Bottas on the way out? Is he not happy? Is there toxicity in the garage within the team? Is there conflict? All these different things, which may not be completely accurate or true to any degree or another. And perhaps it's just people like us that are talking about it. But I think that just by virtue of not doing anything so far, it has become a distraction to them.
So my question to you, because I think everything you're saying makes total sense. And remember, we went through this last year. We went through this almost, to be fair, it wasn't even the back half of the calendar. We went through this with Red Bull and Alexander Albon all year last year. And what a
Yeah.
distraction that was. My
Yeah.
question for you is, if you're Mercedes and you're now in this situation, and whether it was avoidable or not, it's now June 25th. We're more than a quarter of the way through the calendar. Things obviously haven't gone your way. There have been a lot of self-inflicted instances of pain. Do you have a conversation with Bottas and you clearly state that you're going in a different direction? Do you publicly announce that? Do you wait till the summer break and you announce the driver swap? Do you wait till the summer break and announce that you're going to change drivers in at the end of the season? To me, I can't see an easy way out of this, because I think Mercedes wants the flexibility of exploring their options in the offseason, even though there's probably not going to be a lot of options as more and more young drivers like Ocon and Lando Norris get tied up to multi-year contracts with their current teams.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
what is the escape from this? And then maybe ultimately, this is only an issue for us. And maybe within that team and that organization, they look at the media and the news reports and Twitter, and they just kind of scoff and laugh and like, let them talk about this. But if it is an issue, if you're Toto, how do you address this on the fly mid-season?
Well, first of all, and I know we're going back over ground that we've already talked about, I think it's extremely bizarre, and I would even venture a tad disrespectful if only have committed to Lewis for 1 year on the back of coming off a seventh world championships, winning and setting all
Yep.
these records. And I can understand why he might have been a little peeved about that. I don't think that he would come out and say anything publicly, but you could understand why he'd be a little bit ticked off about that. Now, if I were them and you want to get that deal done with Lewis, you got to get it done sooner rather than later. And be it again for next year or for 2 years, whatever it is, whatever he feels comfortable in committing. But I think on the flip side, I think that you have to be upfront with Valtteri and just straight up say to him right now, okay, yeah, we're going to bring you back for next year, but you know what, we want to get this deal done with Lewis. We've got a championship to focus on. We've got races to win. You know what? You're going to come back. If you want to come back for 22, we'll have you back for 22. We'll get the deal done later in the year when we've got more time to focus on it. Be upfront with them. Or on the flip side to that, the other side of the coin. I don't know how many sides this coin has. But if you're not going to bring Bottas back, do the right thing now and say, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. It doesn't matter who that direction is going to be. Obviously, it would probably be George Russell, but tell him now so that he has ample time to sort out something in Formula One, because I'm sure there would be any number of teams that would love to bring a guy like Valtteri Bottas into that team should he want to do that, and not wait till the bitter end like Haas did with Rogro and
Great
Kevin
point.
Magnussen last year.
Fantastic point.
You know, and I think that Mercedes is a far classier organization than that. I just think that this wasn't handled optimally. That just from my point of view.
I think you're absolutely right, and you make a great point on that Lewis Hamilton situation, which is he was out of contract coming off his seventh drivers' championship, the seventh consecutive constructors' championship for Mercedes, and I really felt like they played hardball with the guy. And I totally get that the economic circumstances and the global social economic environment was a little bit topsy turvy because of the COVID situation. But this
Mm-hmm.
guy did everything you could possibly have asked him to do for 8 consecutive years. He wins 6 drivers' titles. He helps you win 7 constructors' titles. He's an ambassador on and off the track. He's the only, at least for most of the better part of the last decade and a half, the only talent that truly transcends the sport. And I just felt like they played hardball in a way with him that was totally unnecessary. This isn't McLaren that is cash strapped. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't Alpine, which is lucky to be fielding a team, and that they're lucky that the Renault board is allowing this team to continue to operate. This is Mercedes. This is a team that spends big cash. They make cash, despite the fact that this is really just a marketing exercise for that brand. I felt it was hugely disrespectful. And again, I get it. There's a whole huge segment of our listeners that might feel otherwise, and they might feel that we're Lewis homers, but really there's little more that you could have asked of him over the past few years. And to toss him a bone in the form of a 1 year, $30 million deal was truly disrespectful. And I think ultimately it wasn't what he wanted. And you could make the argument that, look, let's give you a deal, Hamilton. Let's get you locked up. We can revisit something longer next season. But if you looked at the way he reacted to the questions about his contract during winter testing and over the winter, he was not happy. He was not happy at all. And I think that that probably resonates with him deep in his core. And I think it's especially pronounced because Toto, who joined the team not long before Lewis, Toto is banking to the value of hundreds of millions of dollars because of his relationship. And again, he
Yeah.
owns a big chunk of this team. But I think for Hamilton, at what point do you extend a chunk of ownership as an ambassador, as a permanent member of that Mercedes team? But I think you're right. I think what's probably happening right now is Mercedes wants to make sure that they get the Lewis deal done. If it's 1 year, if it's 2 years, if it's 3 years, they can start planning. They can start planning what that second seat is going to look like. So my sense is they want to get that wrapped up. But I agree with you in the Bottas situation. He's in a tough position where he can't really go out and openly start exploring other opportunities because he doesn't know what his future is going to be. And obviously, if
Mm-hmm.
there's an opportunity to stay with Mercedes and drive the most the fastest race car on the planet, you need to do everything you can to win that seat. So he's in a very difficult position. But if Mercedes know, I hope that they finish this Hamilton deal and they have that honest conversation with him. Because at this point, I don't know what the harm is in announcing that, hey, we're going to make a driver swap in the winter. We're probably
Mhm.
not going to do it mid-season because that's not our style. But what's the harm at this point? Give Bottas that extra 4 or 5 months to hunt for a new job, because maybe there's an opportunity in
He's earned
Formula
it.
One that we don't know
He's
yet.
earned
I
it.
totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to jump in there, but I felt I should say something about that because he's helped you win a whole bunch of championships. He's been the consummate teammate. He's done everything that you could possibly ask of him and more. And he's won some races along the way. Obviously, he would have liked to win more. He would have liked to win a championship or two or three of his own, but he's done everything. He's delivered. He helped settle that really toxic environment that existed there up until 2016. He was the breath of fresh air that they needed. He wasn't confrontational. He was going to come in. He was going to go about do his own business. He was going to be the good teammate to Lewis. He wasn't going to what do you want to call it, upset the waters in within the team like Rosberg did with Hamilton. So do the right thing by him. If you're not going to bring him back, fine. This is pro sports. People change teams all the time, but do the right thing. Give him the opportunity. Give him the time to find another opportunity within the sport. Find another team. Unfortunately, sports isn't always fair. It isn't always the right thing isn't always done each and every time, but I would hope that they do the right thing at the right time. But it does sound funny when we're saying that the deal that Lewis got to the tune of $30 billion in a 1-year contract was disrespectful, but it is just because he is such a unique case and a unique person within the sport with what he's accomplished that I don't think that the the money is in any way disrespectful, but the term, just that lack of a long term or medium term
Sure.
commitment
Sure.
to me says a lot. And I think it was sort of interesting. You had Anthony Lewis's dad and his one time manager coming out and saying things. Well, who knows where Lewis's head is at? Who knows if he really wants to stay in the sports long term? I think that was kind of a very carefully worded and released timed announcement by his dad. I think that was Lewis almost speaking through his dad just to kind of really hint at Mercedes or to Mercedes where his head's at and what he might be thinking. But
Cool.
it is interesting. Anyways, I do want to talk next about Sergio Perez, and we'll do so. But first of all, Mark, let's just take a really quick break. We're going to reload and get a drink of water here, and we'll come back and we'll talk about Checo. So, guys, don't go away. We'll be right back in just a moment. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. And we were talking about Lewis, we were talking about Valtteri and the status of their contracts, if you want to call it that. But Sergio Perez said that he hopes that talks over a new Red Bull contract don't take too long and that negotiations will go, what he says, very smoothly after what has been a strong start working together, his words. And I keep coming back to the same basic starting point. If you're Red Bull and you don't give Sergio another deal, I don't know if they want to go the Bottas route with him and give him another 1-year deal. But the thing is that if you didn't commit to Sergio for at least another year in a partnership that is clearly starting to fire on all cylinders, that seems to really be working well now that he's gotten used to the team, he's gotten used to the car, and has won a race himself just recently. If you didn't give him another contract to come back in 22, who would you who would you bring back in place of him? Nobody. Nobody. That's I don't even really know how this is a conversation, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add. I've been accused recently of being something of a Red Bull homer, which is bizarre because I've cheered aggressively against them for much of the last 15 years. But the partnership seems to be working, and there's this
Yeah.
collective atmosphere of trust and mutual respect between Max and Sergio. And I think Max really now does understand and respect and appreciate how valuable it is to have a talented driver next to him, both for the constructors' ambitions for the team. But I think Max is also beginning to understand that you can't win a driver's championship by yourself, that it's a team effort, and you can't win a driver's championship unless you've got a teammate that's great at blocking and is helping gobble up as many drivers points as possible to take them away from other people that might be challenging you for that title. And
Great
I
point.
think Max came to Red Bull. He was racing alongside Daniel Ricciardo. He probably took for granted that he was racing next to an elite talent. He was then positioned next to Gasly and Albon. I don't think he appreciated the distraction and the drama that came along with being partnered with those drivers. Not that either of them were doing anything wrong personally, they just weren't as competitive as they needed to be in those cars. And
Hmm.
that in itself becomes a distraction. And I think he was also probably frustrated because he was putting in performances that absolutely eclipsed that of his teammates in Gasly and Alexander Albon. So I think he really does appreciate and respect and has a tremendous amount of mutual admiration for Sergio Perez. And I think it's a great partnership, and I think it works. I think the question is going to be not whether he gets a renewed agreement, but rather when does it happen and what does the term look like? I
Hmm.
would hope I would hope in the spirit of putting aside this ongoing distraction that Red Bull commits for at least 2 years. I think that would be a great gesture. And I think it helps take this story out of the press, right? If we're sitting here a year from now talking about does Sergio get a third year? Are they going to renew him for 2023? That's not a good look, especially if they're continuing to compete. Hopefully they give him a couple of years, maybe 2 years in an option or 2 years in a team option. I think he's earned it, not necessarily just on the track, but what he's been
Hmm.
able to do team perspective and from a relationship perspective with Max.
I'm going to take this a little bit further, and this is just me. Maybe I should go and get the tinfoil hat and throw this one on there on top of my head instead, because I was thinking, could you imagine a scenario? And this will never happen, of course, but maybe it will because it's Formula One, and sometimes the unexpected and the bizarre becomes reality. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be weird if they decided not to bring back Checo Perez to Red Bull next year, and he gets swooped up and picked up by Mercedes? Could you imagine that? Wouldn't that be like the most bizarre thing that could happen? And I was just like, it would never happen. But then I kept thinking in the back of my mind,
But can
it
you
could,
make it the
it could.
title of this podcast? Because if that's the title of this podcast, our download numbers are going to be through the roof.
Yeah, then we'll get complaints from people. Oh, you guys,
Sergio to Mercedes? Question mark.
question mark. Yeah, we'll get labeled as clickbaity podcasters, but it's kind of I just could help think about that. Now let's talk a little bit about Red Bull themselves. But they said, and Christian Horner, the team principal, said that he feels that he's a bit baffled by some of the comments that Mercedes was making after the French Grand Prix. And they said that they believe that the straight line speed advantage they had at Paul Ricard was down to what they called, or Mercedes said it was a big step forward with the Honda engine. So I think it's quite interesting that it was put this way. Anyways, Christian Horner, he had to say, "quote We're not allowed to make progress." I don't know what he's referencing there. I think that it's the same specification as the first unit. We've run a much smaller rear wing, so that's why the straight line performance was strong. I think Honda are doing a great job, but we don't see a sudden significant increase in power, end quote. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. And I had to kind of wonder if this was maybe Toto trying to deflect from the issues that Mercedes has been having, because what Toto had to say about Red Bull at the French Grand Prix was the following quote: "They have made a huge step forward with their power unit. The introduction of the second power unit and the race car is good, no doubt about that," end quote. And I guess part of it has to do is I think that they were running fresh engines in France. I know Max was. I don't know if Sergio was as well. But I wondered if maybe there was something got kind of lost in the quotes, maybe when Toto was saying that they've made a huge step forward in their power unit. I'm just wondering if he was maybe referencing from 2020 to 2021 rather
Totally.
than in season, which of course couldn't
But
happen,
the
right?
the implication is that if you read that quote at face value, and again I'll repeat this, Toto
Yep.
Wolff said of Red Bull's form in France, they have made a huge step forward with their power unit. That implies that they've improved their power unit, not that they have a new power unit to replace the old power unit, even though
Yep.
they're the same specification. The new one's fresher and is producing more power. Like the implication, and you're right, it could have been lost in translation. It could be a bad quote. It could be a literal translation issue. But the
Hmm.
implication, of course, is that they're continuing to modify the power unit, which, of course,
Yep.
is absolutely against the current Formula One regulations, which is engine specifications are completely frozen. You can swap your power units 3 times a year, or you can swap it more if you're willing to take on those grid penalties. But the
Yep.
current regulations state you cannot be incrementally improving your power unit race over race, week to week, month to month. That specification is frozen. What you bring into the championship is the engine. And I guess from a Red Bull perspective, you take a little bit of offense to that, especially if you're Marco or Christian, that you're now being accused by your principal rival of doing something that's clearly against the current regulations.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because the way that I took it when I saw, Sergio's, when I saw Toto's quote was, I felt that he was just referencing the leap forward from one season to the next. And we
Right.
all knew that Honda was going to throw everything into the development of this engine for this year, being their final year in Formula One. And now this is obviously going to be the basis of the new Red Bull power units moving forward next year. So I thought it was kind of interesting. So a related one, Christian Horner uh, feels that the win that they had in France actually disproves the theory or the accusations with the rear bendy flexi wings and the under pressure tires in Azerbaijan, and that the car and everything that they're doing has just not been proven. So, anyways, Christian had to say, "quote A lot of comments have been made in the last few weeks. We've had accusations made, but we've complied with the rules, and the way that we've reacted, I think, shows the strength and depth that our performance isn't based on rear wing flexibility. At all times, we've always followed the prescriptions from Pirelli, and obviously, the increase in tire pressure this weekend was challenging for all the teams." But then again, the engineering team have done a great job in optimizing the car around it. End quote. So it is interesting because this flexi wing drama, saga, whatever you want to call it, seems to have almost dissipated. It was really a thing after the Portuguese Grand Prix, and there were even some threats from Mercedes about protesting the flexi wings ahead of the French Grand Prix when these new, this new technical directive came into play, and the whole new testing and everything like that. But it is interesting, though, that Horner feels that that's really been put to rest, and that they really feel that they've been proven almost to the contrary, that it wasn't a big performance thing. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's And I think from Red Bull's perspective, they probably have to be feeling pretty good about themselves right now. Obviously, nothing of significance came from the FIA's investigation into the bendy wings over the last couple of race weekends. Obviously, they were in the pit garages in Baku and they'd stickered the wings and they were monitoring flex, and they'd instituted some new protocols to get a better understanding of whether wings that teams were employing were violating the current formula. But I think they must be feeling pretty good, right? Because on the one hand, they're being accused of incorporating a bendy wing. And obviously, they're not the only one. It was just very, very obvious because they're running at the
Yeah.
front of the pack, and Lewis had made those comments. And then you go into Baku and you have the tire incidents with both Lance Stroll and with Max Verstappen. And of course, the accusations are that, hey, this happened not because of a failure in the tire, but because you guys were running a tire pressure that's prohibited by Pirelli as being unsafe. And maybe that's how you're gaining performance, because you're running a lower tire pressure to gain more grip, and that allows you a speed advantage. So I think they probably feel pretty good coming out of France with a really clean victory. And my suspicion is we'll probably see more of the same in Austria the next 2 weekends, and they'll
Hmm.
continue to feel good about themselves. But it's also good for the sport, because I don't think any of us ultimately wants to see a championship darkened by these type of allegations. And again, for those of you that are new, what we've talked about this year with bendy wings and tire pressures, if it's not bendy wings and tire pressures, it's sideboards or side pods, brake ducts. It's always something. But
Yeah.
it's good that this is being clarified a little bit more. But to be honest, a month from now, we could be talking about Mercedes's bendy front wing. So it's always part of the conversation. It's always part of the narrative. But if I'm Red Bull, I am probably feeling pretty good about myself for the exact reason that you just stated, that they come out of France with a really dominant, really, really clean victory.
Yeah, it is funny too when you think about all these sort of controversies over the past couple of years. Like you say, there's always something. It's either low tire pressures or bendy wings, or like you say, brake ducts, or burning oil or some sort of illegal fuel map or something, which should,
Exactly.
and it's always something. And it goes back to the email we had from a listener a couple of weeks ago asking, are these guys, are they always trying to bend the rules and try and find an advantage? And yes, 100%. And that is part of the reason why we're seeing these technical directives coming out all the time, because it is amazing that all these little things that they do to the car, like putting the clear tape over the joints and the bodywork to help shave off like a tenth or a hundredth of a second, whatever it might be, it all adds up to faster lap times. It means less drag. So all these things that they do for a reason, and they're always trying to push the envelope a little bit more and just find that little bit more speed, and ultimately that sets a faster lap time.
And just to be clear, we want to see that. We want
Yeah,
to
oh yeah,
see the
yeah,
teams pushing the boundaries and the engineers pushing the
yeah.
boundaries. And it's the FIA's job to push back, but with very
Yes.
clear, concise, and consistent interpretations of those same rules. And it's when the teams find an advantage and the FIA isn't clear on their response, or they're inconsistent,
Mhm.
that's where it becomes controversial.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, if there is there is an incident where the rules are broken, that they have to be, like, say, consistent, and then they have to be transparent with what the
Unlike Ferrari in
exactly,
2019.
that's
Yeah.
exactly where I was going. They have to be clear, transparent, and consistent with punishment, and that one still gets under my skin and really kind of irritates me quite a bit. Anyways, another thing that irritates is taking a break when you're in the middle of a topic, where we're going to do that because when we come back, I want to talk about an organization that I'm finding is quite. I'm feeling quite organizationally top heavy. You might have a little bit of insight into this. I'm hoping maybe you can add some additional context to do that. And we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be back on the flip side. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. And Mark, what I was talking about before the break there was the sudden departure of Williams' former team principal, Simon Roberts, amidst what is a basically a restructuring of the team. I mean, he was team principal for less than a year, which was a bit surprising. But Jost Capito, who is the CEO of Williams, said, and this is what really blew my mind. And this is I'll read you the exact quote, and then I'll see if this pops out for you and everybody else as much as it did me. So, anyways, Capito had to say, quote, during the first 100 days, I took huge efforts to understand how the teams work. I talked to more than 80 managers in one to one meetings and asked them all the same questions. So I got a good overview of what we should change and what we should keep. It became clear that engineering should be all on one hand, track engineering, design, aero should all be one hand. There should be under the technical director, then there should be a technical director who has done all the jobs in racing, who has been at the drawing board, who's been a race engineer, who's done R&D, and FX is exactly that person. You have a technical director in charge of everything that is related to the car. You have a sporting director who's related to everything not with the car and the race team, and makes the race team work and function. So the technical people don't have to bother. They can fully focus on the car and the performance. With that, the capabilities that Simon offers didn't fit into the system. Simon did a fantastic job through the change of ownership to keep the team together. I think that's always a very critical situation for the team, and the team can't fall apart and get in a dip. He did a fantastic job keeping the team together, and we're very thankful for that. Now, the one thing that really blew my mind was right off the very top. And he said, I talked to more than 80 managers in one to one meetings so I could ask them the same questions. Now, this is, I don't know if it was a typo in the original article because it said how I took huge efforts to understand how the teams work. I just wonder if that should be team. And then I was just wondering because I could imagine he went to all the other teams in Formula One and interviewed their employees, how they operate, which I would think would go down like a lead balloon if you may ever approach one of your rivals to say, yeah, I'd like to interview some of your key employees to find out what makes you guys tick. I don't think that's going to happen. But the one thing that said 80 managers, is it possible that there are 80 managers within the Williams Grand Prix organization?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time digging into this because I thought this was very, very interesting as well. That to your point, they onboard a team principal, or they onboard a new executive last summer. He's promoted to team principal in the winter, and midway through the season, he's effectively evicted from this role. But
Hmm.
a couple of moments ago, you comment on the fact that the article states, you know what, I went and talked to the teams plural. I think that's exactly the crux of the issue here, is that in many ways, culturally, philosophically, Williams is broken. And they're broken in the sense that all of the different departments within that organization are operating in total silos. They're compartmentalized. And I think one of his findings was that if you went to the factory and you talked to the aerodynamists and you talked to the engineers and you talked to the team in the air tunnel, their perspective was, look, everything that goes wrong on the track is our fault, and everything that goes right on the track is the result of the mechanics and the team that travel every single race weekend. So there seemed to be this really significant breakdown between these two forces. There's the factory and operations and manufacturing and design, and then there's the actual race team. And that there seemed to be this total divide at Williams between the two, and they simply weren't functioning well together. And I think ultimately what they're hoping to do is bring all of those groups under the same leadership, the same banner, to create some symmetry and to help erode some of these bad cultural behaviors and habits that have arisen over the past 4 or 5 years. Now, ultimately, unless this team can find a way to be successful, I think a lot of this negativity and a lot of these ingrained attitudes and beliefs will persist. But I think that's really what he found was organizationally, culturally, philosophically, it's a really unhealthy place right now. And there was a
Hmm.
significant divide between the race team and effectively everybody else, and that the two simply weren't intermeshed in the way they need to be successful like the other teams are.
You know what's really interesting? I think it goes back to season one of Drive to Survive, and they didn't really get a lot of love in all three seasons so far. But there was one episode, I think, in season number one, where they are at the factory, and I think it was really quite interesting because they have. I don't know if you want to call it like a pep rally, but anyways, you have Claire Williams addressing basically an auditorium full of hundreds of people, and that's not necessarily an unusual circumstance or an oddity in Formula One. But I thought it was quite interesting when it came to the size of people or the number of the people in that auditorium for this speech, this gathering that Claire was addressing the people in attendance for. But I thought it was extraordinary that there were that amount of people there for a team that was struggling at the bottom of the grid with no clear or any other way, sort of clear path forward from the basically from the bottom of the abyss. I really remember that as one of the stark moments that stuck out from that 2018 season.
To put this in perspective, and I think this is a really great observation, is it's understood, and Williams does issue their financial statements, but it's understood that Williams has 650 people on their payroll. To put that
Hmm.
into perspective, given how terribly they perform, Haas has about 225. The current incarnation of the Aston Martin team was at 300 a couple of years ago. It's now up to about 450, and I think we've heard Otmar and I think we've heard Lawrence Stroll indicate they want to get to 600. The
Yeah.
Mercedes team
Yeah.
is understood that between their power unit factory, their main factory in Brackley, they're at about 1,200. Red Bulls around 550, 600. So given their performance on the track, their headcount is extraordinarily large, and it would tell you that the limited resources that they have are going into people as opposed to necessarily materials and R&D, and the type of things that technologically can move you forward. But I recall that exact moment. I just want to add real quick because I was having dinner with a friend the other day, Dead Randy from Twitter. He and I were talking about the Claire Williams, Frank Williams situation. To
Hmm.
me, still find it really frustrating that she was never given the opportunity to be anything but deputy team principal. I
Yeah.
felt like she was never given that opportunity. I think she was sold short. I think she was in a really tough position where, regardless of what she maybe said or did within that organization, said to the team, the decisions that she made, she
Hmm.
always had somebody over her shoulder. And she probably had a lot of people in the organization doubting her because she may say this, but ultimately Frank's the real team principal. I'm still frustrated to this day that she never had that opportunity.
Yeah, it kind of begs the question, though, if you have that situation, if she's the deputy team principal, yet she's the one at the factory all the time, she's the one that's at the track every weekend.
Exactly.
It's just like who ultimately is the ultimate boss, right? And
Exactly.
it's just like you say, she never really had the team, I wouldn't say firmly in her clutches, but she wasn't really given full reign to do what she needed to do
Totally.
as a team principal. Yeah, that
Totally.
that's a great observation.
And not to get too far off track, we had that conversation the other night over dinner and we both got worked up and I'm still angry about it because especially in the spirit of empowering women and making them better and integrating them into the culture of motorsport, there was an
Yeah.
opportunity and she just never had that shot.
Yeah, certainly it's frustrating, but I mean, it seems most things that that team has done in recent years has been very frustrating. So
Totally.
hopefully they will be able to dig themselves out and become less than, well, I don't want to say that they were a laughing stock, but certainly a shadow
Yeah.
of their former selves. Okay, Mark, we're gonna have one more break in about 5 or 6 minutes. I just want to start talking about the race this weekend, which I think is very interesting. And then later, I just want to close off the show. We got a couple of interesting emails I just want to talk about. First of all, we did have a nice long email from Armando in Toronto, and among other things, is really long, wonderful email, and we'll have to address some more of his points in the future. I think one thing that he talked about was he said I'm a big McLaren and our Red Bull fan with Checo, obviously even more. And of course, I'm biased when it comes to Checo. Hence, I really appreciate your honest views on him as a driver, just to manage my expectations. And then the one thing that kind of it made me laugh, and it kind of was a bit of a sobering moment because Armando goes on. He says, "Your podcast is different from other auto motor racing podcasts, which is why I like it. When listening to your podcast is like me listening to one of my friends discussing F1, although you are much better articulated." So that's maybe a little bit subjective, but I appreciate the love. And then he says, just some feedback from avid multi-topics podcast listener. I love your enthusiasm and how vocal you are with some topics, but sometimes you go off topic and never get back to the main point. That one stung for about a millisecond. Then I realized he's completely on point.
As 2 seconds ago, that just happened with Williams.
Exactly right. Anyways, we will come back to his email at some point a little bit further down the line. But I did just want to talk about in the minutes before the break here, just about the race itself. We're going to Austria. It's going to be same basically as we saw last year, except this is sort of halfway through the calendar almost compared to the two races off the top of the year, which it was last year. Because same thing as last year, we have the Austrian Grand Prix this week, and then basically the same thing next week, and it's going to be under the banner of the Styrian Grand Prix. But it is interesting because we're in a bit of a different situation. Last year, it was, and that's why I kind of find it a little bit difficult to draw parallels between last year and this year, because it was the first two races of the year after an extended layoff at the beginning or the early days of a pandemic when so many things were in flux. And Max Verstappen was coming out this week, and he said that past success in Austria don't guarantee a win this year, because both races last year were won by Mercedes, won by Lewis, and by Bottas. In the previous 2 years, in 18 and 19, Max won the race there. So it's a bit of a tough race to call. I really don't know what to make of this one. Obviously, you have to think that this is Red Bull's home track. Like I just mentioned, they won there in 18 and 19. Last year, a bit of a strange situation, but you come off a number of successful weekends for Red Bull. The momentum in the championship has been in their garage as of late, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee success, just like Max was saying.
Yeah, I agree. This is a race I get very, very, very excited about, and I have absolutely no reservations about going here back to back. I'm hoping, and when we were in the Spaces chat earlier tonight, we were checking out the weather forecast, and it looks like possibly qualifying could be wet, the race could be wet itself. It would be great to have a wet race and then a dry race the subsequent weekend, but I really do enjoy this track for a couple of reasons. For those of you that don't know, and I think that's probably a lot of folks that are newer to the sport. The Austrian Grand Prix, at least this incarnation at the Red Bull Ring, was reintroduced in 2016. There have been a whole multitude of different configurations and variations of this track over
Hmm.
the years. The current configuration is much, much shorter and much more compact than any of the ones that we've seen before. And if you look at an overhead topographical view, it almost looks like something out of Mario Kart. It looks almost too simple. But what you don't see on the topographical map is that this track is basically carved out of the side of a mountain. So you have these monumental, epic variations in landscape. And it's really, really exciting for me because the first half of the track is effectively being raced up the side of a mountain, and the back half is coming down again. So you see different tire
Yeah.
strategies, you see different levels of tire degradation, you see very variable weather. So this week's going to be hot, but the weekend could be wet. To me, it's one of the most exciting tracks. I love that it's short. I love that it's compact. I love seeing these sub 1 minute 10 second track or laps. To me, it's very exciting. And you nailed it as well that this isn't a track that Lewis has dominated or really even Mercedes has dominated in much the same way that they have a lot of other places. If you go back to 2014, Nico won for Mercedes in 14, 15, Hamilton won in 16, Bottas won in 17. Max put in a huge performance in 18 and 19. And of course, Valtteri won here last year. And I don't know if we're going to see that. The other consideration, and this is a really interesting point as well, is the track's actually owned by Red Bull. So you talk about Red Bull as this corporate entity that's really invested in motorsports, whether it's extreme sports, MotoGP, Formula One. They own two Formula One teams and they own a track. It's pretty cool. So
Hmm.
incidentally, maybe this is somewhere that Red Bull should perform well. My sense is that everything seems to be going well for them. This is a high speed track. I think they should do very well. My expectation is you could possibly see two Red Bulls on the podium, at least two Red Bulls in the top four. But if it's wet, again, it's totally unpredictable and anything can happen.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing too. While you were talking, I just pulled up the weather forecast for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So it's going to be partly cloudy at the Red Bull Ring, and it says it's going to be unsettled from the middle morning to the evening. A chance of thunder showers will increase after 12 p.m. FP2 could be a wet session, so it's they're forecasting 25 degrees Celsius, which is about 77 Fahrenheit. 40% chance of rain. So FP3, and then qualifying on Saturday, sunny in the morning and unsettled weather in the afternoon. 40% chance of rain, 22 degrees Celsius, so about 71, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And then Sunday afternoon is going to be unsettled with what they're saying right now is moderate chance of rain, which they're calling 40%. And then again, 21 degrees Celsius or about 70, 71 degrees Fahrenheit. So it really could throw an element of unpredictability into it, like we saw last year, right? I mean, we had a very wet weekend and then followed by a sunny one, so it certainly would add an element of unpredictability into the weekend. Certainly, it would make it. Well, I suppose if it was raining, it would be kind of refreshing, anyways. But pun not in pun intended. But it certainly could make it a very interesting
the
weekend.
one the one moment from last year that is burned into my memory, and it wasn't even something that happened on the track. Of course, last year the season opened in Austria. We had that 3-4 month delay. We didn't know if we were going to have a season. Of course,
Yep.
there's that artificial moment in Drive to Survive where Zach Brown's walking around the McLaren factory, gets a phone call. He's like, "Oh, we're having a season, 17 races, sounds good," and he goes to book an airline ticket. But obviously, the season kicked off in Austria, so we had to back at Austria, and people weren't sure
Yep.
how the COVID protocols were going to work. Obviously, there weren't fans there. But the one moment that's really burned into my memory is there was that long shot with the helicopter, and there was those fans that had hiked up on the face of the mountain above the
Yes.
track, and they
Yep.
were watching. I thought that was so awesome. And then in the Styrian Grand Prix the following weekend, that crowd had enlarged significantly. But I thought that was a really great moment.
Yeah, that's right. I seem to remember that they've done that. They've shown that angle before in previous years. So
Oh,
it
I'm
must be a
sure.
real insiders thing that people that want a good view of the track without actually having to pay to go in know that you go up that logging road or access road or trail or whatever it
Yeah.
is, and know that you can look down because it is a beautiful venue. It's Austria is just a beautiful country to begin with, but I mean it is a fantastic setting for a Grand Prix. Anyways, final break here coming up, Mark. I just want to, when we come back, just run over a couple of stats for the race, and then we'll just delve into the mailbag and we'll slowly start to shut it down. And we'll do so in just a moment. So hang in there, guys. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. We're just starting to wrap it up slowly but surely. So, just to give you some numbers here for the race itself. So, the lap distance, total lap, or sorry, race distance, pardon me, 306.45 kilometers, 71 laps. Circuit length is 4.32 kilometers. Lap record was set by Carlos Sainz in the McLaren last season, and that is a 105.619. Pirelli is bringing their more or less mid-range compounds, the C2 hards, the C3 mediums, and the C4 softs. And, well, the one thing that I always do whenever it comes to predicting anything really is that when somebody's on momentum, I find it hard to bet against them. The longer that they've been having success, the harder that I find to bet against them. That's why I was very reluctant to bet against Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes for a very, very long time. But just thinking going into the Red Bull ring, basically their home track, they're on a roll, Red Bull that is, and the fact that there is a prospect for wet weather this weekend. We all know how good Max is in the wet. I can't help but thinking that circumstances, at least theoretically, are stacking up nicely for Max and stacking up nicely for Red Bull this weekend. You agree? Disagree?
Yeah, I agree. I'm one of those people that's easily won over by momentum, and I need to be shook out of that. I think obviously people would be excited by a Max win. The other stat that I read earlier today as well is Red Bull's on the verge of helping create something that we haven't seen since 2013. This could be the first time since 2013 that there were four consecutive races in which Mercedes didn't win one. Like I don't know why I'm having so much trouble articulating this, but it could be the first time since 2013 that Mercedes didn't win any of four consecutive races. Okay, I got
Mhm.
it. That makes sense. So for me, obviously, what I would like to see is I want this again. I'm now financially invested in this championship going down to the absolute wire. So I would like to see Lewis Hamilton or anyone but Max Verstappen win this race because I want to make sure that championship stays as close as it can possibly be.
Yeah, great point. Hey, cool. So we've given our predictions and we got a little bit of time left. I haven't heard anything about MotoGP Corner, which is good because I don't have the jingle lined up.
Doesn't
But if you
matter.
got something,
Doesn't matter. I'll make this one
oh,
really quick.
okay,
So,
go for it.
MotoGP news. To put this into perspective, we all know because you've been listening to the show since the beginning, Valentino Rossi is very much the GOAT of that sport. Although that could change, especially if Mark Marquez can get his career back on track now that he's overcome some injury issues. So, Valentino Rossi wrapping up his career. This could be his last season. But in the meantime, he has spent the last number of years bringing together investors and putting together his own premier MotoGP team. So he is launching next year the Aramco Racing Team VR 46. He has signed a 3-year agreement with Ducati to supply bikes, and he signed a 5-year agreement with Dorna, who's effectively the Liberty equivalent over on the
Hmm,
MotoGP side of motorsports
interesting.
to compete. So his team is now locked into the MotoGP championship for the next 5 years. They're going to be running Ducati bikes for the next 3 years minimum, which means that there's actually going to be 8 Ducatis on a grid, which is crazy since there's only 2 Suzukis. But that's kind of very, very, very cool. The other thing that I promised is we want to start talking, and we've had a ton of people reaching out about Formula 2 and Formula 3. Ben sent a really elegant DM via Twitter a couple of days ago talking about how much value it could add to the show if we started talking a little bit more about F2 and F3. I don't think tonight, but the one thing that I did want to mention, because I think we absolutely owe it to our listeners and to the sport, is this is the first weekend of the WC or W Series Championship. So like we talked about earlier tonight in the Spaces chat, the W Series is back. It's an all-female championship. It is built around spec cars, so all of the drivers race the exact same cars. The same team prepares all of the cars. The drivers share telemetry, they share data. There's a ton of parity, so it's absolutely a championship about skill. The big difference between 2019 and 2020 is that, or 2021, is that in a bid to help promote and bring more exposure to the W Series, the W Series will be functioning as a support series for Grand Prix weekend. So in 2019, it was very much kind of on its own, doing its own thing, scraping and clawing for whatever exposure it could get. This year, they will be racing at Grand Prix weekends on Grand Prix tracks with all the exposure that comes with it. But their season kicks off this weekend, and I couldn't be more excited to see how that story plays out. And we promise we'll bring updates as the season goes on.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. 100% we will for sure. Okay, mailbag time. So got a couple of emails I wanted just to read out really quickly here. First one's from Chuck. It says, "Oh hi, Marks. Just started watching F1 this season. I'm curious about the relationship between Red Bull and AlphaTauri. How much does the Red Bull main team benefit from having a sister team, if at all? And why don't the other top teams have junior/sister teams?" So, first of all, the reason that they have the relationship with the Alpha Tauri is that it was basically a funnel to get their drivers through their academy, through their system, get them experience in Formula One with the Alpha Tauri slash Toro Rosso, which it was before last year, before making that step into the main Red Bull team. Now that has basically been their model for a long, long time, and they've struggled with that in the last couple of years with Pierre Gasly, and he made the switch back to AlphaTauri, as did Danny Kvyat, who lost his seat at Red Bull to Max Verstappen. And then you've got Alex Albon, and that's why Checo Perez is basically the odd man in that whole situation, is because they don't tend to bring very many guys out of that system into that second seat at Red Bull. Because I mean, Ricardo was a Red Bull guy through the system, so was Sebastian Vettel. I mean, a lot of drivers are. So there's that benefit there. I mean, it is a different team. I mean, even though they're within the same sort of parent organization, if you want to call it that, the thing is, every team has to design and build their own unique car, which they do. I mean, this is not Benetton and Ligier from the 1990s, which I think they almost had like identical cars back then, but that's a different discussion for a different day. And other top teams do have sort of sister junior teams, but they're more in the form of relationships, which you
Yeah.
see with like Ferrari, with their relationships that they have with the Alfa Romeo, with Haas, etc. Right, whereas they can just kind of parachute their drivers in and really have a big influence over these teams that are also running Ferrari power units. That's why you have Mick Schumacher at Haas. That's why you have Giovinazzi at, I was going to say Sauber, but at Alfa Romeo. So there's a lot of heavy influence there. I mean, they're all their own independent teams in their own rights, but just being under that Ferrari umbrella, if you will, having the Ferrari engines, there are certain benefits, pros and cons, if you want to call it that, with that Ferrari relationship, for
The only
example.
thing I would add, and I think you did a fantastic job of summarizing this, is the reason that more teams don't outright own a B team or a development team is they're incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And a couple of days ago, or maybe a week or two ago, Vincenzo Landino, one of our great supporters, had actually posted a financial statement for AlphaTauri for the prior season. And if
Hmm.
you look at that financial statement on the surface, it looked like the team earned $2 million, but one of their sources of revenue was an $84 million cash injection, a cash transfer from
Oh.
Red Bull. So the team itself is underwater a huge amount without that cash injection. So you can take on a B team, but ultimately it's a huge, considerable expense. And I just want to reiterate as well your other point that in the case of the Alpha Tauri Red Bull relationship, really the benefit to Red Bull is exactly what you said. It's a development channel, it's a conduit to develop drivers at the F1 level before you move them into the Red Bull seats. Ultimately, and we talked a lot about this the last couple of weeks, the technical regulations prohibit teams from running similar or identical chassis. So that team is fundamentally required, as per the technical regulations, to develop their own car. And of course, there's certain parts that they can share in terms of gearboxes and engines and things like that, but ultimately they have to develop their own car.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing else to add to that. Great points that you added to that. Next emails from Donald Kelly in Madrid, Spain. It's the only Irishman in Madrid. Maybe not, but great to hear from Donald. And the question, actually, it's more of a statement, if anything. Says, "I love the podcast, guys. Got into F1 because of DTS. A question: Do you think that Perez will pass Hamilton on the track this year? I reckon he has all the chance of doing so." I think that's an interesting situation to think about. I mean, he was a little bit off pace compared to, say, Max and the two Mercedes last weekend, but if he could find a little bit more speed and maybe be a little bit closer to Max, say the way that Bottas is to Hamilton, if those four cars were more close to each other, I think it would be really fascinating to have maybe sort of a four-way battle between both of those two teams. And it's certainly, I think that there is an opportunity there, because there is obviously no clear cut advantage for either of these teams. It's kind of gone back and forth over the first several races of the season before it's been more heavily weighted in Red Bull's favor over the past couple of years. But as enjoyable as it is, as it has been to watch Max and Lewis scrapping it out this season, I think it would be great to see Perez, added into that conversation, and Bottas as well. I mean, it's one thing to have two guys fighting for the championship, but to get both cars on both teams involved, I think would be cool.
Fantastic. Totally agree. I don't have anything else to add. I just think that would make for an incredibly compelling championship.
Okay, awesome. Now we got another one here from Michael Pasquarelli in Pittsburgh. So Steeltown checking in, and this is a kind of a cool one. He says, "Just mean to let you know I love your guys' podcast. I recently became a fan of Formula One through watching Drive to Survive. I started watching once season two came out, but never really knew much about the sport until I started listening to your podcast. So thanks for doing what you do." That said, I have a question on the Formula One fan experience. When I started watching the docu-series, I became a huge fan of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. As it turned out, the two were not teammates driving for Ferrari at the time. My question is, in Formula One, are people not usually supportive of a team, no matter the drivers, or drivers no matter the team? Hope you guys have a good one. Keep it up. Love listening while I grind away at my desk. Best, Michael Pasquarelli. So that is an interesting, and I think that is interesting about Formula One, is people tend to, and I guess it's almost personal, if you're more loyal to a team than to a driver, or vice versa. I mean, I think if you ask this question in Italy, the automatic question, or the automatic answer to that is it's Ferrari, and we will support the Ferrari drivers. And if we love that guy who was driving for Ferrari today, and next week he's driving for Mercedes, we hate that guy. He's not a Ferrari driver anymore, and he's basically out of the family, right? But I think it really depends. I mean, I think you have like a big loyal following for Ferrari. You have a big loyal following for Mercedes. I think that there's also a big following for some of the other teams, especially like for McLaren, and that the love for McLaren, I think, tends to go back a ways, especially for people in our generation that kind of grew up and watching Formula One when they were kind of in one of their previous heydays in the early 90s and late 80s with like Senna and Prost and whatnot. But it's different because, I mean, if you're, say, a hockey fan, you're always going to cheer for the Canadians. Shout out to them because they won tonight. Or you're a Raiders fan, for if you're a football fan, whatever it might be. But I guess the one way that I kind of thought about it is that, take basketball for example. There might be people that cheer for the Lakers because they love the Lakers, and then there might be people that love LeBron because they love LeBron, and they'll cheer for the Cavs, or they'll cheer for the Lakers, or whoever, just because LeBron changes or plays for that team. That's the only kind of equivalent that I could sort of kind of like equate it to.
Yeah,
What
I
do you
think
think?
you absolutely stole my thunder. I think this is a great question, and it's a very North American question, and I don't mean
Yeah.
that in a disrespectful way at all. I think
No,
we
no.
like to relate new sports to what we know and we understand. And you're right, in a sense, if you look at Major League Baseball, and if you look at the NHL, and if you look at the NFL, I think typically fans, partly because of culture and personal identity and the neighborhood they grew up in and civic pride, I think fans are typically attached to a team regardless of the roster. I think the NBA, you're absolutely right, is a little bit of a different beast in the sense that there's this certain segment of fans that support a team and they'll always be committed to that team. But I think there's this younger base of fans that grew up being not a fan of the Jazz or the Suns or the Cavaliers, but they grew
Hmm.
up being a fan of Kyrie or KD or LeBron, and they
Sure. Yeah.
shift allegiances based on where that player is. And that's in part because the NBA, unlike the NHL, which is terrible at this, the NBA has done a phenomenal job of promoting talent and individuals. The
Hmm.
NHL could learn something there. Major League Baseball for sure could learn something from that. And actually, so could the NFL. But the NBA does a really good job of promoting individual talent and empowering individual talent. I think this is a really great question from a Formula One perspective. And I think you nailed it. I think there are some teams that demand allegiance regardless of performance or drivers, and Ferrari's one of those. McLaren maybe a little bit, but for the rest of the grid, I think fans typically support drivers. And
Hmm.
I think we did a poll not more than 3 or 4 weeks ago where we asked this specific question. And the question was, do you follow a team? Do you support a team or do you support a driver? And overwhelmingly, I think the split was 80-20. At least our listeners follow the sport to support a driver, not a team. So very different than I think we see with team sports. And for me as well, I've got this emotional connection to Williams, but I don't care if they lose every weekend. And maybe that's just because I've become conditioned to that happening. But likewise, I'm a big Lewis fan, but I'm not super emotionally invested in the long term success of that team. So I think I even probably fall into that bucket where I'm more invested in individual drivers than I am a specific team.
Yeah.
Awesome
Yeah,
question.
totally agree. Yeah, it's a great question. And just before we sign off here, got Michelle G checking in on the live chat, just going back to what we were talking about Checo catching and passing Lewis. And she reckons that if there were a couple more laps at the French Grand Prix, that Perez would have passed.
Yes,
Yeah, I think
100%
so
true.
too. Yeah, 100%. Cool, man. Well, that's all I got. You got anything else in your back pocket
No,
that you
just
want to
one
talk
last
about
thing. I
tonight?
promised to shout out, so I'm learning every week how far spread our listeners are. So shout out to Malta because we have a very
Cool.
strong. So fantastic! Thank you for listening. Thank you for the continued support. But that's really all I got. I had my second vaccine today. The first time I got mine, I was knocked off my feet for about 18 to 24 hours. I'm starting to feel that way now. So I think our timing to log off is perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for checking in, for downloading and listening to the show. For those of you that joined us in the live chat on the YouTube live stream, and then also earlier on Spaces tonight, it's been a busy night for us. I feel that it's a good time of night to shut it down ourselves and just get through. We got one last day before the weekend here. It is the last wee dying moments of Thursday. Sorry, I was going to say July 24th, a month ahead of myself, June 24th. And then weekend is literally right here. I can feel it. So anyways, have a great weekend, guys. Enjoy the race. You want to get in touch, best ways, hit Mark up on the Twitter at ScuderiaF1Pod. And also, if you want to send us an email, ScuderiaF1Pod@gmail.com. That's a wrap. Enjoy the race. Talk to you guys on Sunday night.